Good afternoon. I wanted to go over a couple of people have asked me about saving settings in gSender, how to export them, and even how to compare if settings have changed from one export to another. I do a lot of backups, and I've talked to a lot of people about doing backups of their settings before you make a change, after you make changes. Also, especially doing upgrades. I just did a gSender 149 to 1410 upgrade. I did a setting export of my settings and did a compare just to make sure that nothing's changed, and I wanted to show everybody how to make those comparisons. So we're going to go over to gSender, and what we're going to do is first thing you do in gSender is prior to making any changes, you want to go to the gear and you're going to do an export of settings. This is going to take you to a directory, your default saving location. It's going to suggest a name, which is the date and time where your settings are. And you'll see here today that I did a pre and post a 1410. So I exported my settings, I upgraded to gSender 1410, and then I saved them again. That way I can compare the two. So I would save those out. I'm just going to go ahead and cancel that. And then we go into firmware, and we're going to do that same import export. So you do an export settings, you give it your name, you save it out there, make your changes, go back in and save it again. If you ever need to import to roll back a setting, you're just going to hit that import, find which one you want to import and bring it in. But the way to know if you should import a setting or what has changed is you can use Microsoft Excel. May work in other spreadsheets. I don't know exactly how those work, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a blank spreadsheet, and I'm going to import my gSender settings. Those are saved as JSON files. So I'm going to say, click on data. I'm going to get data from a file, and I'm going to go from a JSON file. Open that dialog box up, and when it comes up, it's going to ask you where you want to pull your file from. So I go into my CNC files, and I'm going to scroll down to where I find my gSender backups. And what I'll do is I'll compare the 1410, what my most recent firmware. Now this is the settings and then the firmware settings. So I'm going to pull in my firmware from this afternoon, and you'll see it pulls up the file. It's going to import those settings. It's going to parse it out into a table. So you'll see here is the firmware setting and the firmware value. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to load this into a table. So we're going to tell it I'm going to go into a table, and here's what it's going to import into Excel. So I'm going to say close and load to, because I'm going to load it into this current sheet. If you don't do that, it will create a new sheet. I'm just going to tell it I want to go into a new sheet. I'm going to go to cell A1, which is right there, and I'm going to import. Now here's all my firmware settings as of this afternoon, and if I want to compare that, it's my next one is I'm going to go into data. I'm going to grab another file from JSON file and go back to my firmware, but let's go back until, let's say, October 8th. Looks like I made some changes on the 8th. I was probably working with somebody changing some values. So let's take a look at what we changed. So I'm going to go ahead and import this. Now here we come in. These are all the values we're changing. And again, this is the firmware setting and the firmware value. So we've already imported this at once. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this column, and I'm going to remove that. I'm going to remove this column from the import because I've already got it. I don't need it again. And then I'm going to load to. I'm going to load back to this existing spreadsheet because I want to stay on this tab. Like I said, if you don't do it, it'll put it into a new tab, and then you'll have to copy and paste data. I'm going up to cell C1, which is cell C1 here, That's where I'm going to pull my data into. And I hit import, and there are my settings from October 8th. Now you'll see all of these, the different settings between the two, and it's hard to tell if you've made any changes in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight both of these columns, and I'm going to go all the way down to the end, and we're going to go back, we're going to go to Home, Conditional Formatting, and we're going to create a new formatting rule. So what we want to do in Excel is we're going to use a formula that's going to determine which cells get this format. So we're going to say if B2, which so we are in column B, starting at row 2, is not equal to column C, and I don't think it really matters, column C2. So that's going to say if column B is different from C, then it's going to highlight that row. And we're going to tell it we want a color fill, let's say an orange background, something there just to catch your eye. So that means anything that's not equal is going to get that format. And then we hit OK, and you'll see right off the bat we've got a setting here, 484. Today is on, back on the 8th it was off. So if I go into gSender, into my firmware, and I look at setting 484, that is the unlock required after each step. You see it's on, which is a 1. Prior to that it was off, which is 0. And that's where that calls out. We can go through, scroll through, and it looks like we've got some other settings, 103, 113, 133. So if I go back to 103, it's A-axis, 113, A-axis. So it looks like we were talking about maybe some vortex at that day. So I changed maybe something with the vortex settings, working with somebody, but today they're back at a different setting. And that goes up and down through there. What I like to do is make a comparison. I save these weekly. Sometimes if I'm making a lot of changes with somebody on a Zoom call, at very least I do a monthly, and also anytime I knowingly make a change. So I'll do a backup first, make my change, and do another backup. Like I said, I upgraded to 1.4.10 today, so I did that same backup, and then that way I'm able to compare, looking through the settings, is what's been changed, and easily able to go back and revert a setting. Even if you don't think a setting changed, maybe something happened and you were looking at firmware settings, or just some sort of glitch happened and something was updated. It's nice to know what changes have been made, and that way you can get back to them pretty quick. That's all pretty much I wanted to show. I've had a couple of people, like I said, a couple of people had asked me when I talk about making backups of the firmware. It's just the export. There's not really a whole lot to it. It's pretty simple. I like using Excel. It just pops in there real quick on how to highlight those differences, and makes life a little bit easier if you're trying to troubleshoot issues. If you have any questions, go ahead and reach out, and I will answer the best I can. Thanks. Bye.